The news that Prince Harry did not fully design Meghan's original engagement ring and the subsequent redesign that erased the influence of late crown jeweler David Thomas represents a symbolic severing of royal continuity in favor of Hollywood artifice. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where in this increasingly complicated world you find yourself. It's a pleasure to have your company once again as we peel back the gilded layers of the latest Montecito melodrama. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over London when a true titan of the old guard passes away, a silence quite unlike the noisy, manufactured clamor we've grown accustomed to from across the Atlantic. On the 18th of January, we lost David Thomas. He was 83, a man who didn't just make jewelry. He maintained the very soul of the British monarchy's visual history. As the crown jeweler from 1991 to 2007, David was the steady hand entrusted with the imperial state crown. He was the man who ensured that when the late Queen stood before Parliament, every stone told the story of 1,000 years of stability. But more poignantly for our purposes today, David Thomas was a man of deep, personal links to the late Princess Diana. He didn't just polish her tiaras, he understood her. He was the craftsman behind many of her most cherished pieces, even designing the wedding bands for her marriage to the then Prince of Wales. To David, a piece of jewelry wasn't a fashion statement. It was a narrative. It was a memory rendered in gold. And yet, while the world of high craftsmanship mourns a man who truly understood legacy, we find ourselves looking once again at the curious case of Meghan Markle's engagement ring. It's a story that has become something of a metaphor for the Sussexes' entire residency in the public eye, a tale of an original, meaningful design being systematically dismantled and replaced by something, well, something a bit more Instagram-friendly. You'll remember the 2017 engagement interview, that gauzy, high-definition display of what we were told was authentic romance. Harry, looking rather chuffed with himself, told the world he had personally designed the ring. He'd sourced a center stone from Botswana, a place close to his heart, and flanked it with 2 diamonds from his mother's personal collection. The message was clear. Diana was with them. The band was a solid, traditional yellow gold. It was classic. It was royal. It was, according to Meghan herself at the time, incredible. However, a well-placed source within the jewelry trade has always whispered that the narrative of Harry as the sole architect was, shall we say, a bit of a stretch for the cameras. While the prince certainly chose the stones, the actual construction and the structural integrity of that original piece bore the unmistakable hallmarks of Cleve and Company, where David Thomas was working at the time. In essence, that original ring was the last bridge between the old world of royal duty and the new world Harry was inviting Meghan into. It had the weight of history. It had the Thomas touch. But as we know, in the world of the Duchess, nothing is ever quite perfect enough if it doesn't reflect the current season's trends. By June 2019, during Trooping the Color, the eagle-eyed among us noticed the first betrayal of that original design. The solid gold band, the one Meghan claimed to love because it was yellow gold, her favorite, had been stripped away. In its place was a thin micro-pavé band. A source within the inner circle suggested at the time that this was a push present or a romantic gesture from Harry. But let's be honest with one another, shall we? You don't take a piece of jewelry that carries the stones of a deceased icon and upgrade it within 18 months unless you find the original design beneath you. To dismantle a setting overseen by a man like David Thomas, a man who actually knew and worked for Diana, is a staggering display of aesthetic arrogance. It was the first step in diluting the Diana connection, keeping the assets, the diamonds, but discarding the heritage, the design. Now, fast forward to where we find ourselves today. By early 2025 and into this current year of 2026, the ring has reportedly undergone what some are calling its 4th evolution. During the promotional blitz for her latest Netflix venture, With Love, Meghan, viewers noticed something even more jarring. The original cushion-cut diamond from Botswana, the one Harry supposedly spent so much time sourcing, appeared to have been replaced, or at least significantly reimagined, into a massive square emerald cut. Someone close to palace circles has noted that the reaction in London has been one of quiet, weary resignation. To change the band is one thing. To potentially swap out the very stone that was the centerpiece of your husband's design is quite another. It suggests a marriage where the symbols of commitment are as replaceable as a seasonal wardrobe. The tragedy of David Thomas's passing in January is that he took with him a level of discretion and reverence that seems entirely lost on the current occupants of Montecito. A long-time family acquaintance once remarked that David could identify a royal commission from 40 years ago just by the way the claws were set. He understood that when you wear Diana's diamonds, you are a custodian of her memory. You don't tweak it to look better with your latest manicure. What we are seeing is the systematic Hollywoodization of a royal heirloom. The original ring was a tribute. The new version is a trophy. By erasing the solid traditional gold and the craftsmanship associated with the crown jeweler's legacy, Meghan hasn't just updated her jewelry, she's signaled that she is the architect of her own image, and Harry's contributions, much like the original band, are merely a base to be built over. There is something deeply cynical about clinging to the Diana label for PR purposes, while simultaneously dismantling the very items that linked her to that legacy. David Thomas spent his life preserving the narrative of the royal family. In contrast, the Duchess seems intent on editing that narrative until the only thing left in the frame is herself. A source behind closed doors in Montecito has hinted that this latest upgrade to the ring was meant to signify Meghan's new era of independence and Hollywood power. But to those of us who appreciate the weight of history, it looks less like independence and more like a lack of respect for the very foundations she used to climb to her current position. One has to wonder, if the ring, the very symbol of their union, is subject to such constant rebranding and restructuring, what does that say about the state of the union itself? As we move into the second part of our discussion, we'll look at how this habit of professional uncoupling from the past is now playing out in their very public and very frantic business dealings. It is often said that when the foundations of a building begin to shift, the first cracks appear in the most visible places. If the redesign of a wedding ring was the subtle fracture, then the spectacle we witnessed at the Sundance Film Festival in late January was the sound of the timber starting to groan. There they were, Harry and Meghan, descending upon the snowy peaks of Utah to premiere their latest Archewell production, Cookie Queens. A documentary about the high-stakes world of Girl Scout cookies, quite the departure from the high-stakes world of constitutional monarchy, wouldn't you agree? But it wasn't the subject matter of the film that had the industry talking. It was the atmosphere between the executive producers themselves. A source within the inner circle has described the current state of the Sussex camp as a professional uncoupling. Now, that's a phrase that carries a certain clinical chill, isn't it? It suggests that the power couple narrative, which they have sold so aggressively since 2020, is being quietly dismantled behind the scenes. In Park City, the masks were on tight, but the geometry was all wrong. Meghan, in her monochromatic black look, a source behind closed doors claims, was carefully curated to project boss energy, seemed to be operating in a completely different orbit from her husband. While she worked the room with the practiced ease of a mid-list actress who finally found her leading role, Harry looked, well, he looked like a man who had forgotten why he was there. A well-meaning staff member who was on the ground during the festival noted that Harry spent much of the evening looking at his watch, or perhaps staring longingly at the exit, while Meghan held court. The dynamic has shifted. He is no longer the prince who brought the Hollywood star into the fold. He is the +1 in the Duchess's new California kingdom. This professional uncoupling isn't just a rumor, it is a business strategy. As we move further into 2026, the divergence in their brands has become undeniable. Harry is retreating or perhaps escaping into the only thing that still gives him a sense of purpose, the Invictus Games. We've seen him more and more in London and Germany, trying to reclaim the old Harry persona, the soldier prince who cared about service. But even that is being scrutinized. Someone close to palace circles has hinted that the king's advisors are keeping a very close eye on how Harry uses his platform, wary of any attempt to shadow the official royal calendar. Meanwhile, Meghan has fully leaned into the lifestyle space. We've seen the rebranding of American Riviera Orchard, which, let's be honest, was a bit of a mouthful even for the most devoted fans, into the more pithy As Ever. A name that supposedly harks back to her days with the Tig, but to the cynical eye, it feels like a desperate attempt to reclaim a version of herself that existed before the royal interruption. The As Ever brand is no longer just about jam and rose-colored linens. It has become a multi-platform beast, backed by a significant deal with Netflix that makes the streaming giant a direct partner in her commercial ventures. A well-placed source in the Los Angeles media scene suggests that Netflix is all in on Meghan's lifestyle series, with Love Meghan, because, quite frankly, they've given up on the couple producing anything of substance together. The grifter label from the Spotify debacle still stings, and the industry consensus is that Meghan is the only one with the drive, or perhaps the lack of shame, to keep the content mill grinding. But what does this mean for the marriage? A source behind closed doors in Montecito reports that the house is now divided into zones of operation. Meghan has her office, her team, and her As Ever empire, which now includes a podcast deal with Lemonada Media titled Confessions of a Female Founder. If that title doesn't tell you everything you need to know about her current self-image, I don't know what will. It is the language of the girl boss, the entrepreneur who has successfully survived the clutches of an ancient institution to sell you organic flower sprinkles. Harry, on the other hand, is increasingly described as the spare within his own household. A longtime family acquaintance who recently crossed paths with him noted a distinct sense of homesickness that the California sunshine can't seem to cure. He is a man caught between two worlds, one that he has burnt to the ground, and one where he is merely a secondary character in his wife's screenplay. The Sundance appearance was a masterclass in what an insider calls transactional togetherness. They appear together because the Sussex brand relies on the idea of their union, but the individual projects tell a different story. In Cookie Queens, Meghan took the stage to speak about her own history as a Girl Scout, framing the narrative around her own journey of ambition and innocence. Harry was relegated to the background, nodding dutifully. It was a visual representation of the new status quo. Even the lifestyle brand's recent Valentine's Day collection, a flurry of overpriced candles and thoughtful living guides, seemed to focus more on the aesthetic of love than the reality of it. A source within the inner circle whispered that the promotional shoot for the collection was tense, with Meghan directing every frame and Harry looking increasingly like a man who would rather be anywhere else. There is a growing sense that the professional uncoupling is a prelude to something more permanent. When you stop working together, when you stop sharing a vision, and when you even stop sharing the same jewelry design, the distance only grows. Meghan is building a world where Harry is an optional extra, a royal tie that provides the initial capital but is no longer necessary for the daily operation of brand Meghan. And as the financial pressures of their Montecito lifestyle mount the security, the staff, the constant need for rebranding, the stakes are higher than ever. A well-placed source indicates that the Netflix deal is under constant review. They need a hit. With Love, Meghan has to deliver more than just mediocre ratings. It has to move product. If it doesn't, the As Ever empire might find itself as hollow as that original gold ring band. We see a couple who are on different paths, as one source bluntly put it. One is chasing a Hollywood ghost, and the other is haunted by a royal one. In our final part, we will look at their most recent public date night, a desperate display of affection at the NBA All-Star Game, and what it tells us about the frantic efforts to save a crumbling narrative. If there is one thing that Hollywood understands better than anyone, It is the art of the distraction, the look-over-here maneuver designed to keep the critics from noticing the cracks in the stagecraft. And so we find ourselves at the final act of our current drama, the NBA All-Star Game in Los Angeles just days ago on the 15th of February. It was a scene as far removed from the quiet dignity of a royal box at Ascot as one could possibly imagine. There they were, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, perched courtside amidst the thumping bass and the glitterati, putting on a performance that a source behind closed doors has described as nothing short of a PR offensive. But for those of us who have spent decades watching the subtle shifts in royal body language, the display was less about basketball and more about a frantic attempt to silence the growing whispers of a professional uncoupling. A source within the inner circle noted that the preparation for this single appearance was as rigorous as a film premiere. The knee touch, the constant leaning in, the overly animated laughter, it was all there. Meghan, ever the actress, seemed to be playing the role of the smitten wife with such intensity that one almost expected a director to shout, "Cut," between the quarters. But a well-meaning staff member, who was part of the logistics team for their arrival, whispered that the car ride to the arena was silent and chilly, a stark contrast to the performative warmth once the cameras were trained upon them. Compare this, if you will, to the Prince and Princess of Wales. When William and Catherine attend an event, there is a settledness, a quiet confidence that doesn't require constant, jittery physical reassurance for the benefit of the paparazzi. The Sussexes, however, seem to be trapped in a perpetual cycle of proving their happiness. And as we know in the world of high-stakes reputation management, the more you try to prove something, the more people begin to wonder why you feel the need to do so. A well-placed source in the Los Angeles media circle has suggested that this sudden surge in public date nights is a direct response to the money talk currently circling Montecito. The overheads of their lifestyle are, quite frankly, eye-watering. Between the private security detail which someone close to palace circles suggests is costing them upwards of $5 million a year and the staffing of their sprawling estate, the financial pressure is immense. And with the As Ever brand still in its infancy and the Netflix deal hanging by a thread, they need to remain relevant. In California, relevant means being seen, being talked about, and being part of the A-list circuit. But there is a deeper, more cynical layer to this NBA appearance. While they were laughing for the cameras back in London, the legacy of men like David Thomas was being honored with the kind of understated reverence that Meghan has spent years trying to dismantle. The contrast couldn't be sharper. On one side of the Atlantic, you have the enduring weight of history, duty, and craftsmanship. On the other, you have the TikTok-ification of a royal title using a duke's status to secure a courtside seat at a basketball game. A source behind closed doors has hinted that Harry is beginning to feel the cheapening of his brand. He is, after all, a man who grew up in palaces, surrounded by the finest art and history the world has to offer. To find himself as a secondary character in a celebrity circus, used as a prop for his wife's latest lifestyle push, must be a bitter pill to swallow. A longtime family acquaintance who spoke to the prince recently noted that he seems spiritually untethered. He has traded a lifetime of purpose for a season of publicity. And then we return to the ring, that ever-evolving piece of jewelry. As she cheered for the Lakers, the light caught that new, massive emerald-cut stone, the one that has all but erased the Diana connection David Thomas so carefully helped preserve. It is the ultimate symbol of her tenure. Take the royal assets, strip away the history, and reset them in a way that serves the current image. It is a metaphor for their entire American experiment. They have taken the diamonds of the monarchy, the titles, the prestige, the fame, and they are trying to fit them into a micro-pavé Hollywood setting. But here is the truth that an insider in the jewelry trade knows all too well. When you keep thinning the band to make it look trendy, you eventually compromise the structural integrity of the piece. You can only redesign a marriage and a brand so many times before the whole thing becomes too fragile to wear in the real world. The professional uncoupling we discussed earlier is becoming a physical reality. While Meghan prepares for the launch of her Confessions of a Female Founder podcast, Harry is reportedly looking for a base back in the UK, not out of a desire to return to the fold, but out of a desperate need for a sanctuary. Someone close to palace circles has made it clear. There is no half-in, half-out return. The king is firm. The crown is moving on. The vacancy left by David Thomas will be filled by a new generation of artisans who respect the narrative of the stones. As for the Sussexes, they are left with the as-ever brand and the flashing bulbs of the NBA. They have chosen the ephemeral over the eternal. They have chosen the now over the forever. And as the curtains close on this particular chapter, one has to wonder what will be left when the trends change again. When the micro-pave band breaks and the emerald cut goes out of fashion, what remains of the story they tried so hard to rewrite? In the end, legacy isn't something you can design in a Montecito office. It isn't something you can rebrand with a new podcast or a Netflix documentary. It is built, stone by stone, through decades of service, consistency, and a respect for those who came before. David Thomas understood that. The late Queen understood that. And as the world watches the Sussexes' frantic attempts to stay in the frame, it becomes increasingly clear that they have traded their place in history for a headline that will be forgotten by tomorrow morning. The ring has changed, the brand has changed, and the professional uncoupling is well underway. The only question that remains is how much longer the public, and indeed Harry himself, will be willing to watch the redesign of a royal life into a Hollywood caricature.